The Making of a Luna. Previous episodes are available on the playlist. You can also visit our website for your favorite stories. A link is provided in the video description. Episode 3. After observing the structure for a moment, she proceeded at a deliberate pace, her mind inundated with thoughts. She continued until she arrived at the ballroom, where a gathering of individuals had already commenced. Subject A generally went unnoticed in her social group. However, at the time of the event, her physical characteristics and personal style were such that the majority of those present turned to observe her. Subject A's long, wavy hair, which rested loosely on her back, her rosy, pink, healthy face, which had become even more glowing, her choice of maxi dress and boots, an unusual combination, and her body, which exuded authority, all contributed to her noticeable presence. Her icy demeanor and cold disposition served to augment her allure, contributing to an overall charm that is both captivating and intriguing. Is that Elara sister? It is noteworthy that she was able to make an appearance. Such a snob, she did not even want to come to her sister's Luna ceremony. It was evident that the female subject had consumed an alcoholic beverage, likely in the form of a shot, from the person known as Elara. I concur. Elara experienced significant emotional distress as a result. It has been reported that she was unable to attend due to a scheduling conflict with her academic obligations. It is evident that she is experiencing feelings of jealousy, which are clearly manifesting on her face. Said another, in a mocking tone. They conversed in hushed tones, yet her acute hearing discerned their voices. Did her sister make such a statement about her? The motivation behind her decision to engage in this act of deception remains a subject of inquiry. It is implausible that the aforementioned individuals fabricated the statement. They were her closest companions. She did not move away from the front door and simply checked inside. On this day, she was determined to ascertain the truth of the matter. Due to the absence of any family members in her vicinity, and the absence of any olfactory evidence of them, she decided to conduct a visual search within the ballroom, as she theorized that they might have proceeded slightly further ahead. However, as she took a small step forward, her olfactory senses were filled with the fragrances of citrus and vanilla. The aroma was so pleasant that it induced a state of heightened awareness in Naira, the wolf, who typically exhibited a reserved demeanor. The latter continued to howl contentedly within her consciousness. She pivoted gradually, her suspicions already aroused by the implications of the situation, just as a tall, handsome man materialized before her. Mate. He spoke in a hushed tone. His countenance exhibited a state of perplexity, yet a discernible yearning was evident in his gaze. A visual confirmation was obtained when her gaze met his, and this confirmed his presence. Mate. In a hushed tone, she offered a retort. Elara, why are you not at your place of residence? It was expected that you would return 5 months later. Her mother's actions evoked a mixture of anger and panic, prompting her to inquire with an elevated pitch, disrupting the ongoing exchange of gazes between the two parties, whether intentionally or not. Indeed, for what purpose has your return occurred? It is evident that you are no longer undertaking the aforementioned exams. The question is posed as to whether the subject's aspiration is to become a moonlight. Her sister Elara also interrogated her, her voice elevated above its typical pitch, yet maintaining the same panicked tone. she endeavored to preserve the facade of innocence. Historically, Elara had acquiesced to her childish and willful conduct, however, it appeared that she had been deceived. The subject could discern the derisive laughter emanating from the cohort of female peers that constituted Eara's social circle. It appeared that her younger sister was informing everyone of the impending exam she was about to take, thereby diverting the collective attention from the present predicament. Despite the absence of explicit gender restrictions, no female candidate had been willing to undertake the examination, as they did not possess the requisite physical strength. It would be imprudent to compare oneself with the most dominant alpha. She regarded her mother and sister, who were in proximity to her companion, without providing a response to their inquiries. If she still did not comprehend the significance of the events that transpired, she would not possess the necessary qualifications to assume the alpha's position. The pieces of the puzzle finally coalesced, providing a comprehensive understanding of the situation. The actions of the subjects and the fact that the male subject was holding the hand of the female subject's sister constituted the answers to the questions posed by the female subject. Previously, she had never sought a mate, yet upon beholding him, she experienced a profound sense of connection, a phenomenon she had never before encountered. Despite maintaining a stoic demeanor, her countenance revealed a state of emotional distress. Notably, the phantom pain she had experienced more than a month prior resurfaced as she observed the pair. It has been demonstrated that the phenomenon under investigation is, in fact, the phantom pain experienced by the betrayed partner. The phenomenon under scrutiny manifested in a consistent manner. Her actions had been imprudent. The other players exhibited a clear preference for her, leading her to question the notion of camaraderie within the group. Despite experiencing emotional distress due to her partner's infidelity, she did not direct her anger towards them. The primary catalyst for her rage was her mother, who persistently disregarded her and consistently prioritized her sister above her own daughter. Despite frequently perceiving Elara as a mere instrument of her own self-interest, she dismissed these sentiments as juvenile envy, attributing them to her younger sister. Consequently, she refrained from addressing this misperception. Her profound affection for her sister should have sufficed. Elara hypothesized that the care she showed towards her was of consequence to Elara. Consequently, she experienced a desire to appropriate even her partner. She had been consistently exploited by them, compelled to relinquish her aspirations for their benefit. Now, she was confronted with the prospect of her own partner becoming her sister's. The sole instance in which the subject was permitted to act according to her own volition was to facilitate her removal from the collective, thereby ensuring that her influence would not be exerted upon the pack. Ha ha ha! The subject exhibited a manifestation of amusement at her own perceived foolishness, accompanied by a discernible dissolution of the previously observed iciness. However, this phenomenon was not indicative of an improvement in her condition, rather, it suggested an exacerbation of the prevailing coldness. The sense of familial affection rapidly diminished. Upon observing her smiling, the majority of the male attendees experienced a sense of initial recognition, despite her familiarity with most of them due to their shared upbringing. The young lady in question possessed a certain aesthetic appeal, despite the fact that her laughter appeared to be insincere. It seemed as though her mirth was not only a form of self-derision, but also a deliberate act of mockery. Nevertheless, her mirth resonated with a certain auditory allure, akin to the sound of small bells being struck, or the melody of a hummingbird's song. The subjects had never previously observed the subject laughing. The notion of familial cohesion is thus rendered moot. She articulated her perspective primarily for her own benefit, perceiving an absence of rationale and attempting to rectify the situation. Consequently, she opted to circumvent the subjects and vacate the premises. The necessity for further elucidation was rendered moot by the clarity of the message conveyed. It is unclear what further discourse could be had with these individuals. The subject's options for discussion with her partner were limited. The partner could be a female, her sister, or her mother. However, the partner's scent was indicative of their relationship with the subject. The partner's scent indicated a possible relationship with the subject's sister, or a possible enmity between the partner and the subject's mother. The subject's behavior was characterized by a pervasive sense of disgust, which was evident in their actions and demeanor. She proceeded with a few steps, on her way to the door, when her sister suddenly pulled her to the side. Elara exhibited an possessive attitude toward him, and her gaze conveyed a sense of animosity. Such behavior is utterly deplorable. All of you. At this juncture, her voice had undergone a complete transformation, losing its characteristic warmth and resonance. Upon uttering those words, her first rank appeared to become slightly more pronounced. Despite her lack of deliberate manifestation, her expressionless countenance and austere gaze nevertheless induced a sense of acquiescence in her subjects, prompting them to seek submission through her authority. Elara had presumed that she desired to embrace her partner with fervor. Such a companion, Elara reflected, would befit Elara, yet not herself. The following perspective is offered by Karen. Before me was the most beautiful girl I had ever seen, my partner. The subject's appearance was consistent with the idealized representation that had been previously established. Her chocolate brown eyes, which were moist with unshed tears, her rosy pink cheeks, her cherry lips, and her small face, everything about her was perfect. The subject's physical and behavioral characteristics were such that the author's wolf pack was compelled to acknowledge her as their own. I had engaged in intimate relations with numerous women. All those who engaged in self-abuse in my presence were accommodated. It was evident that the long-awaited discovery of a suitable companion was imminent, and thus, the primary objective was to maximize the level of enjoyment and fulfillment derived from the present experiences. Prior to my return to the territory of my pack, I never rebuffed the young females who approached me with the aspiration of becoming the Luna. While I may have privately found their antics amusing, I would never turn down a complimentary meal. Upon locating her, the missing half of my soul, I committed myself to a life of dedication, devoting myself to the protection of my pack in my role as the alpha. This commitment superseded my previous state of freedom. Upon encountering Elara at the social gathering, the olfactory sensation of her strawberry-scented perfume was immediately apparent. It was hypothesized that the aforementioned individual would be the one. At that time, the wolf in question stated that he did not experience the typical mate pull towards the female wolf in the pack. This sensation was also not perceived by the author. Apart from her olfactory profile, she did not appear to be a suitable partner. However, she was the most aesthetically pleasing among her companions, a quality that set her apart from the others. If she were not the most suitable candidate, then who else would be considered worthy of becoming the partner of an alpha? Therefore, I inquired of her the reason for my perception of a faint scent from her, as if she were my mate, yet I did not experience the immediate attraction toward her upon her approach. Her gaze conveyed a profound sense of affection and optimism. However, she exhibited a slight hesitation in response to the inquiry posed. After a brief period of silence, she proceeded to articulate her rationale. She explained that her age, being only 20 years old, might have contributed to her delayed shift. Abruptly, the olfactory sensation intensified as she gazed toward the doorway with her eyes fully opened. The reason for this was unclear to me, so I turned to look behind me, following her line of vision. However, I was unable to discern what had captured her attention, as she once again captured my interest. For the duration of the ball, the subject remained in close proximity to the author, exhibiting a strong attachment. This elicited a positive emotional response, as it was accompanied by a fondness for her eagerness and her reassuring presence. We were the focal point of the event, as all attendees gazed upon us with a palpable sense of envy. In the ensuing days, there was a marked increase in the time spent in each other's company. Her presence and adorableness were found to be utterly satisfying. The subject was characterized by her amiable demeanor, perceived purity, and perceived naivete. This product is an optimal solution for a Luna. The surrounding community expressed their support and encouragement, fostering an atmosphere of camaraderie and shared experience. Her popularity stemmed from her amiable disposition and upstanding character, which earned her the respect and admiration of numerous individuals. It was universally acknowledged that she was intelligent and considerate of her friends and family. From a young age, she has demonstrated a proclivity for culinary endeavors, household maintenance, and sewing. On occasion, she has even produced garments for her acquaintances. It was communicated to me by her associates that the subject in question exhibited a greater degree of maturity in comparison to her older sister. Despite the older sister's attempts to draw parallels between the two, she found herself unable to do so, despite her efforts. It was evident that the veracity of the statements made could be corroborated through first-hand observation. For instance, the sister of the subject exhibited delusions concerning her desire to enroll as a student at Moonlight. This led to a state of emotional distress, manifesting as a tantrum, which was only subdued when the mother acquiesced to the daughter's wishes. It should be noted that the subject, a diminutive and aesthetically pleasing companion, divulged this information exclusively to the author. This decision was influenced by the subject's emotional state, which was characterized by despondency and disillusionment concerning her sister. She refrained from disclosing this information to her friends, as she sought to avoid exacerbating the already considerable disapproval they harbored towards her sister. It was also noted by her companions that my acquaintance possessed a greater degree of aesthetic appeal than her older sister. I concurred with this assessment, as I had previously observed her older sister's photograph when she presented me with a series of photographs of her family on her mobile device. Her presence was characterized by an invisible quality, and she consistently maintained a solemn expression. In the photographs observed, she did not exhibit any signs of smiling, and she frequently averted her gaze, obscuring her eyes from view. Nevertheless, I did not devote a significant amount of time to observing her. Instead, I focused my attention on my companion, whose countenance, characterized by its cheeriness and attractiveness, was positioned adjacent to hers. As the observation period continued, it became evident that the fragrance of the strawberry scent intensified, indicating a probable shift in Elara state. Over the course of several days, I found myself developing profound sentiments for her, and ultimately, I relented to my impulses, leading to an eventual commitment. The present day was designated for the Luna ceremony. However, it was necessary to mark the female dog for the procedure, as she was already pregnant with the male dog's offspring. Despite my emotional attachment to her, I was still awaiting the experience of the mate pull. The subject's wolf exhibited no discernible interest in her, with the exception of her olfactory profile. The underlying reasons for this phenomenon have only become clear in recent days. Upon entering the ballroom, the olfactory sensation of the strawberry fragrance was immediately apparent, with the scent being detected even from a distance of a few steps behind the subject. The scent was overwhelming, both in terms of its potency and its pervasiveness. It dominated the ambient scents in the room and surpassed the olfactory signature of my presumed partner. I was perplexed and, consequently, I directed my gaze skyward, following the scent, while my lupin instincts howled within my consciousness. Upon establishing eye contact with the subject, the author experienced a sense of physical weakness, a rapid heartbeat, and a palpable sensation of connection with their counterpart. This encounter provided a profound realization concerning the nature of encountering one's true mate. My acquaintance was the sister of Elara. The general consensus was that the individual in question was a person of low character, lacking in maturity, and too trivial to attend her sister's ceremony. However, the reasons for my inability to comprehend the information provided to me, or to discern any indications thereof in her demeanor, remained opaque. It is difficult to fathom how an individual of such exquisite beauty could be anything but flawless. She regarded her sister with the same disdain reserved for a diminutive ant. Following an initial expression of mirth, she returned to her inscrutable countenance, and her tears had ceased. It is possible that she inherently understood the true nature of these individuals, yet was reluctant to acknowledge this realization. Her family exhibited an absence of emotional and psychological investment in her well-being. In the context of the present moment, the only individual whom she would still deem to be part of her familial unit was her brother. Henceforth, the remaining members would be regarded as unknown persons. With these considerations in mind, she proceeded to depart from the venue, leaving them behind without further acknowledgement. At that moment, her sole desire was to create a physical distance between herself and the others. The subject reported experiencing a sense of suffocation as she prolonged her stay in the pack's territory. This sensation was accompanied by a reflection on her actions and the potential for escape. This was her intention, but as she hurried down the hallway, she was suddenly halted when she encountered her brother face to face. The utterance was made by the subject known as Big Sister. Lucien's call was met with elation, and he proceeded to embrace his sister, expressing affection and closeness. The subject was not privy to the events that had transpired in the ballroom. The young man had always felt a sense of alienation from Elara, and as a result, he did not feel particularly enthusiastic about attending her Luna ceremony. Consequently, he considered only traversing the venue interior once the ceremony was on the verge of commencement. "It is a profound pleasure to see you. I missed you." He expressed profound joy. Despite her feelings of disappointment and anger, Elara maintained her composure and rationality. Recognizing that she would never direct her resentment towards others, she refrained from speaking, opting instead for a gentle embrace. During her absence, he appeared to have undergone a growth spurt, indicating his progression towards adulthood. Pondering the manner in which she had arrived at the ballroom with such expediency, Lucienne was intrigued and felt compelled to inquire about her method. However, as he released her from his embrace, he perceived a peculiar anomaly. His sister exhibited an increased degree of aloofness and introversion, suggesting a state of emotional distress. Have there been any developments at the academy? What is the issue? Were you subjected to bullying due to your gender? He inquired of her, expressing concern. His older sister exhibited a reserved demeanor and was unlikely to reciprocate any form of aggression. On the contrary, the situation is quite the reverse. The treatment I have received has consistently exceeded my expectations. Elara's response was composed and measured. She reflected that the treatment she had received was superior to that received from her own family. Then why are you upset? Reflecting on the situation, it became apparent that the subject's trajectory was antithetical to that of the ballroom. He observed his surroundings with a sense of perplexity, seeking to identify the source of the issue. I had the opportunity to interact with a diverse group of individuals, and I have since made the decision to return to the academy. She expressed a desire to avoid further elaboration on the subject. This course of action was ultimately deemed to be futile. Furthermore, engaging in conversation would result in a protracted departure from the pack's designated territory, thereby precipitating additional adversity and distress. The subject had reached her limit for the day, and, in fact, for the entirety of her life. However, you previously stated that you were on your break. It is difficult to comprehend how one can consider departing when one has only recently arrived. It is evident that the rationale provided by Elara's sister was intended to evade the crux of the matter. This justification, far from being a substantive response, served merely to obfuscate a more profound issue. It is noteworthy that Elara's emotional response, characterized by her upset, would only emerge in response to a matter of considerable severity. Elara. An authoritative voice abruptly interrupted their conversation before she could respond. The voice belonged to a parent who had not seen their child for more than a month and who did not show any affection. The subject of the photograph is identified as Parker, the father of the subject, arriving for the ceremony. He was in the company of the alpha of the pack, Devon, and his Luna Cynthia. Upon observing the scene, Elara attempted to suppress her emotions. She was unaware of the specific individuals involved in the deceptive act unfolding within the ballroom, otherwise referred to as the Luna ceremony of her sister. However, even if she was aware of this fact, her sole objective remained unchanged: to depart from the institution. Demonstrating the utmost respect she could muster at that particular juncture, she nodded slightly in the direction of the newcomers, acknowledging their presence without uttering a word of greeting. Upon her enrollment as a Moonlight student, she and her peers were provided with a concise compendium of guidelines, which encompassed the regulations that the other packs were obliged to observe during interactions with them. According to the text, becoming a Moonlight signified the dissolution of one's affiliation with their original pack, and instead, their integration into the pack collectively formed with the other Watchers. This newly formed pack was referred to as the Royal Pack. Consequently, they were obligated to maintain a certain distance from the members of the pack that had previously granted them authority. Moreover, they were required to adhere to a more formal comportment, rather than the humble manner to which they had been previously accustomed. This transformation occurred immediately upon the manifestation of their tattoo on their bodies. It is important to note that, from the perspective of their academic standing, these students were already regarded as having met the standard of being considered half a moonlight. Elaborating on this point, it is important to note that submission to the alpha of their home pack was no longer obligatory. In fact, it was now strictly forbidden. What is the rationale behind your refusal to submit to the authority of your alpha? Your mother informed me of the imprudent nature of your actions. To be forthright, would it be advisable to request that she become the object of derision? It is imperative to note that the individual in question has not yet taken the test at the academy, and therefore, it would be premature to assume a sense of superiority. He expressed his displeasure with a booming, furious voice. Her father exhibited an authoritarian demeanor, meting out reprimands for the most minuscule of infractions. It is evident that he exhibited similar tendencies to her mother in terms of demonstrating a discrepancy in treatment, which was predicated on the belief that the Luna fate was attributed to her sister. It is acceptable, Parker. It is imperative to maintain composure in such circumstances. The girl's actions were not intended to cause any disrespect. Devon's smile indicated her contentment, while Cynthia's slight frown conveyed her displeasure. Elara refrained from responding to her father, disregarding him and maintaining her gaze on her brother. The significance of her father's imposing voice had diminished significantly. The subject had never experienced trepidation toward her father, as would typically be the case in relation to a higher-ranked alpha. Instead, she exhibited a comportment of deference toward him. This behavior had initially led the latter to conclude that she harbored a sense of trepidation towards him. However, with the removal of the veil, the previously observed deference dissipated. For reasons that were not clear to her, she felt that her father was also aware of the lie and had taken part in it. If not at the very beginning, as he was absent, it is likely that he was informed of the actions of her sister and mother at a later point. I am departing at this time. I will provide the new number via text message at a later time. The Academy has issued a new number for me to use, which I am obliged to accept. Should further elucidation be required, the author may be contacted via the aforementioned number. In the event that any difficulties arise or if there is a desire to schedule an in-person meeting, individuals are requested to contact the author via telephone. The author will promptly arrange for the necessary transportation via commercial airline. It is imperative to disregard considerations pertaining to financial expenditures at this juncture. Simply initiate communication via telephone, and the task will be completed promptly. She exhibited a slight smile directed at her brother and administered a kiss on his forehead. Pause momentarily and consider the implications of your words. It is perceived that your return is improbable, is that correct? Lucien inquired, his tone conveying concern. Is there truly an issue at hand? She merely smiled slightly and began to depart, as she had no desire to remain in that location for even a moment longer. The emotional distress associated with the bond continued to be a source of discomfort. She expressed a desire to be distant. In contrast to her previous experiences, the subject's behavior at the Academy was notable for its absence of any indication of the phantom pain typically experienced. Elara, pause. Karen vociferated as he hastened in her direction. Elara endeavored to halt the assailant, yet he disregarded her attempts and advanced towards her, with Elara and her mother following from behind. It is perplexing to comprehend how he could allow his true mate to depart. It is plausible that she misinterpreted the situation, operating under the assumption that he did not desire her presence. Provided that he articulated that she would comprehend him and return, she was his. She was the sole individual in this world who would genuinely understand and love him. Alpha Karen and Luna Elara have been selected for an appointment. She articulated her statement in a straightforward manner, with her head oriented in the direction of the interlocutors. Her countenance, devoid of emotion, remained unchanging, yet her choice of vocabulary was meticulously chosen to delineate the nature of their relationship, seeking to categorize it as minimal or superficial. It is imperative to note that the individual in question is indeed the legitimate Luna. In response, he expressed a sense of panic, as he considered the possibility that she might be contemplating rejecting him. Upon hearing this, those present in the hallway reacted with astonishment. Elara and her mother were the only individuals who did not express surprise. The inquiry posed by the interlocutor is intended to elicit a clarification of the term rightful Luna. The subject's inquiry provoked a state of perplexity in his father. "Father, she is my partner." In response, he articulated his sentiments with a sense of urgency, expressing a perception of having been treated unfairly. The subject in question expressed surprise at the claim that Elara was one's partner. It is therefore necessary to inquire into the reasons for the change in name to Elara. Devon articulated with a pronounced intensity. It was hypothesized that Elara would possess a sense similar to that of Elara, yet the anticipated mate pull was not perceived. Elara stated that she had not shifted until that point, which led me to hypothesize that this might be the underlying reason for my inability to perceive the mate pull toward her. However, upon encountering Elara, it became evident that a profound and lasting connection had been forged, leading to the realization that she had been my true mate. Karen promptly elucidated, attempting to provide a justification. You. It is imperative to ascertain the rationale behind the absence of such inquiries. It is difficult to fathom the rationale behind such a conviction. Even if Elara had not yet shifted, it would have been evident in her eyes, and the mate pull would have been palpable. Devon's response, tinged with exasperation, conveyed his discontent with the thoughtless actions of his offspring. The inquiry posed pertains to the specific meaning of the statement made, which alluded to Elara's apparent lack of transformation. At the beginning of this year, she underwent a transition. Lucienne expressed bewilderment. It is noteworthy that the character referred to as Luna in the narrative is not the same character referred to as Elara. It had long been evident to him that the young lady in question possessed no trace of the characteristic ferocity that characterized the Luna breed. Karen's comprehension of the situation finally materialized at this point. He now understood the reason behind her panicked expression at the ball and the reason why he did not feel the mate pull. The pieces of the puzzle came together, and it became apparent that he had been deceived. Elara exhaled audibly. The subject's emotional state had undergone a transformation, no longer exhibiting signs of distress. It appeared that her sister had indeed rendered her a service. Had she encountered Karen previously, it would have been impracticable for her to become a moonlight. The sole outstanding issue was the involuntary pain in her heart, which caused Naira to howl incessantly since she had seen her partner. However, she was intimately acquainted with her lupin nature. She would have never consented to a liaison with an individual who had engaged in infidelity with other women, and she would have certainly not acquiesced to one who had impregnated her sister. Since his arrival in the pack's territory, she has experienced recurrent phantom pains on a nearly nightly basis, even prior to her encounter with her sister at the ball. It is difficult to fathom why an individual would elect to engage in such a relationship. The three of them would be well suited for one another, as has been demonstrated in the past. Sable had emerged from the depths of her consciousness and enveloped Naira with her substantial body, a gesture of protective instinct. In her warm embrace, the latter settled down. Karen's demeanor towards Elara suggested anger, and it appeared that he was capable of inflicting severe harm upon her. The subject was identified as the root cause of the aforementioned issues. The subject's appearance, characterized by an absence of affection, prompted the latter to seek refuge behind her mother. It is noteworthy that, subsequent to her encounter with Karen, she perceived a hitherto unprecedented level of lethal intent emanating from him. This marked the first occasion on which he had exhibited such a facial expression in her direction. Given that she was already carrying his pup, it is perplexing to ascertain why Elara would still matter to him at this juncture. Alpha Karen, I implore you to temper your indignation. Elara is currently in a state of fragility. Her mother intervened promptly in an attempt to mitigate her son's anger. Despite the apparent missteps in their strategic planning, they found themselves in an unanticipated advantageous position. The puppy that was developing in Elara's uterus was the rightful successor to the pack. It became imperative for him to confront and come to terms with this reality, irrespective of its nature or implications. Nevertheless, an alpha's rage posed a considerable threat. In a moment of anger, he had the potential to inflict harm upon Elara. Is she considered to be in a state of fragility? She was the one who impeded my relationship with my true mate. The subject's vocalizations were characterized by an erratic nature. The subject's anger exhibited a marked upward trend, and his aura leaked uncontrollably, compelling those in his proximity to submit to his will. Even those present in the ballroom across the hallway were able to perceive the shift in his mood, although they did not venture to leave, as he had instructed everyone to remain indoors. The only individuals who did not display a gesture of submission were his father and Elara. Her aloof demeanor remained consistent from the outset to the present moment. His aura was not commensurate with that of the lowest-ranked member of her pack, and that assessment was made with the utmost diplomatic restraint. Sister, please inform him that you did not desire a romantic partner. The subject's aspiration to become a moonlight has been a lifelong ambition. This prompts the inquiry into the subject's immediate departure following the ball's release. Her sister's plea was articulated in a subdued and contrite manner, a stark departure from her previous assertive demeanor. It was hypothesized that, given their prior mating and the subsequent gestation of Karen, the subject would exhibit a pattern of behavior characterized by the intentional avoidance and rejection of the female subject's sister. This hypothesis was based on the premise that the female subject was the subject's appropriate mate. From a very young age, the subject's distant sister was consistently disregarded by those around her. It was evident that the subject perceived her as being inferior. This was the rationale behind her decision to deceive Karen at the ball. Upon seeing her and approaching her, her heartbeat accelerated, and she experienced a sense of pride in her actions. It should be noted that she was his Luna. The mate pole was a concept with which she was not yet familiar. She was only aware that, based on his appearance and his position, he was a person with whom she could be compatible. However, her confidence diminished when he inquired about the source of the subtle odor on her person, reminiscent of his own. The subject did not comprehend the meaning of the statement until the speaker indicated that the scent intensified. At that moment, the subject perceived her sister standing at the entrance. She had taken her dress, and there was insufficient time to launder it, despite her sister's prior attempt. Consequently, Elara's scent was pervasive on the garment. Aware of the situation, she swiftly initiated action, successfully capturing his attention. Fortuitously, her sister encountered an unexpected obstacle and remained stationary at the entrance. A waiter inadvertently spilled wine on a woman's light-colored dress, compelling her to depart from the venue to address the stain. Following Elara's departure, she experienced a state of concern, perceiving the possibility of her imminent return to the ballroom. Consequently, as soon as Elara was able, she contacted her mother and apprised her of the events that had transpired. Initially, her mother expressed contentment and stated that it was acceptable for Elara to be Karen's partner. In essence, she demonstrated a lack of concern regarding the specific identity of the mate, provided that one of her daughters was the Luna. Furthermore, it can be posited that Elara would also have an alpha mate, a scenario that would prove to be even more efficacious. However, she found it intolerable. She perceived Karen first and only, and he could be her partner. Furthermore, in the event that she was unable to locate her true mate, her sister would ascend to a more prominent position within the pack. It is evident that she would never consent to such an occurrence, as she is apprehensive about the potential social disapproval from those in her social sphere. She has consistently demonstrated excellence and remains an exemplar in her field. She persuaded her mother of the possibility that the probability of locating her true mate was not yet extinguished. In the event that Elara, characterized by her aloof demeanor, did not align with Karen's preferences, what consequences would ensue if he were to reject her advances? Ultimately, her mother acquiesced, motivated by the prospect of at least one of her daughters following in Luna's footsteps, and assisted in her departure. The initial expectation was that she would be absent for a period of 6 months. By that point in the proceedings, she would have already been identified and catalogued. It is evident that a female individual would be precluded from participating, even during the examinations for the watchers. It can be deduced that Elara was sent away by them. She experienced a visceral reaction, characterized by the involuntary tightening of her jaws, indicative of anger. In this situation, Elara's role was that of a maternal figure, a fact that did not negate the discomfort she was experiencing. It is reasonable to assume that she would provide assistance. From a young age, she had consistently requested things of her sister, and her sister had consistently acquiesced. Therefore, she was effectively suggesting that Elara should assume responsibility and portray Elara as the individual who had requested that Elara impersonate his partner. She had presumed that Elara would provide assistance, but she had been the naive one. Her sister had previously assisted her, as she was aware of Elara's juvenile and naive demeanor. However, she was not imprudent in her decision to provide assistance, irrespective of the circumstances she was confronted with. This is particularly salient in the present moment, as the severity of the transgressions committed by the aforementioned individual has increased. This was not a frivolous prank, nor was it a task that Elara would undertake in her stead. Furthermore, these were not garments and baked goods that she would claim as her own. This was not merely a phase, it was an authentic expression of life's essence. In Elara's estimation, her value was determined by her role as a facilitator, devoid of any intrinsic significance beyond her function. Nevertheless, in acknowledgement of Elara's contribution to her enrollment, despite the absence of genuine intention on the part of her younger sister, she refrained from either denying or affirming her words, and did not seek to exacerbate the situation. This would have indicated her genuine desire to be Karen's partner. The following is a list of pertinent sources for further study. In the midst of pervasive silence, Elara's mobile device abruptly emitted a resonant auditory signal. The situation had already been in a state of impasse for a considerable amount of time. Elara's apparent lack of response to Elara's entreaty left Elara uncertain as to how to proceed. It is imperative to note that any additional statements on her part could potentially exacerbate the current state of affairs. Myrna, the protective mother, was unaware of the methods to ensure the safety of Elara in the event of a sudden attack by Karen. With regard to the other individuals, it should be noted that, with the exception of Elara, who expressed a desire to depart, each individual exhibited a greater degree of astonishment than the preceding individual. The resolution of this predicament remained elusive. Within the confines of the ballroom, the pack members were awaiting the initiation of the Luna ceremony, which was intended to facilitate the union of a simulacrum mate, one who was with child. The question remains, how can the situation be rectified? It is imperative to ascertain whether the opportunity to rectify the issue was indeed present. Lucien, on the other hand, was the only one who cast a worried glance in Elara's direction, but he found himself unable to articulate his thoughts. The question arises as to what he could convey to his sister. Elara's actions, while perhaps not unprecedented, represented a significant escalation in the dynamic between the two women. The boundaries that had previously defined their relationship had been clearly transgressed on this occasion. The collective silence that ensued contributed to the prevailing discomfort, exacerbated by the incessant ringing of the telephone. She proceeded to calmly check her phone, only to see Jackson's name appear on the caller ID. A friend who had been absent for a period of 1 month subsequently contacted the subject via telephone, yet her family did not make any effort to contact her, despite the fact that a month had elapsed since her departure. "Hello." She proceeded to answer the phone in their presence, displaying a lack of concern for the prevailing atmosphere. She had stated that she would contact him after arriving home, but she failed to do so. It would be considered inequitable to respond in the absence of the affable individuals in her proximity. "Greetings, Alpha." His greeting resonated in her auditory perception, his enthusiasm for her voice palpable. The subject's tone was clear and happy, which created a marked contrast with the somber atmosphere of the funeral. It is evident that the high-ranking werewolves of her pack were capable of perceiving the auditory stimuli, despite the fact that the individual in question was not utilizing a speaker. It is not clear whether the two parties were engaged in a jocular exchange or if there was a more profound underlying meaning to their interaction. Their countenances appeared to convey a contradictory sentiment, as if to inquire, why would one refer to a female as Alpha? "Greetings, Jackson." I apologize for my failure to fulfill my promise to call you. The subject admitted her actions without offering excuses. Her warm tone, which was a departure from her usual demeanor, evoked a range of emotions in Karen, including a profound sense of heartache and envy. Despite her minimal verbal contributions during this period, her tone resonated deeply, evoking a complex web of sentiments. No problem, no problem. It is noteworthy that the leaders of these organizations have not been the subject of any significant criticism. I would like to inquire about the status of your return home and whether you encountered any difficulties. He articulated a reassuring sentiment. The secretary notified the group that, although the regular classes are scheduled to commence on September 15, for students enrolled in the Moonlight program, the start date is earlier, on September 1. It is therefore advisable to plan to arrive a few days prior to the aforementioned date. As your beta, I informed her that I would personally notify you, and she would not contact you directly. He informed her enthusiastically, expressing his elation that she would return earlier than expected. I am grateful for the notification. I would like to request your assistance in a matter that I will now describe. Elara inquired, her tone maintaining composure. The information regarding the Moonlight classes served to exacerbate the residual sentiments of sadness and resentment she harbored subconsciously towards her family. Certainly. Anything for my Moonlight Pax Alpha. He responded with alacrity. I do not have the secretary's number stored on my old telephone, and the Academy-issued telephone is not in my possession. It is imperative that she reserve a flight ticket for me to the Academy at the earliest possible convenience. The duration of the journey to the airport is approximately 1 hour, and flights that exceed 2 hours are considered optimal. Her voice remained unchanged as she informed him, yet he perceived a subtle anomaly. She had previously indicated that she would remain at home for the duration of the vacation period. However, she now expressed a desire to return immediately. It is evident that the circumstances surrounding her departure from her family must have been particularly troubling. Elara's behavior did not align with the characteristics of an unruly and irrational individual. In fact, she demonstrated a high level of attentiveness and exhibited a propensity to internalize distress rather than inflict harm upon others. Even prior to their departure for the city, the meticulous care and contentment she exhibited while selecting gifts for her loved ones was indicative of the profound value she placed on their well-being. However, from her family's perspective, while it was not possible to ascertain their sentiments towards her, it was evident that the sole individual with whom she maintained contact was her brother. The remainder of her family had not contacted her in any way. Nonetheless, he did not interrogate her. They were scheduled to converse in person at a later time. Very well. The secretary has indicated that the individual is welcome to return at any time and will be issued a first-class ticket on the next available flight. It is already possible to proceed to the airport. The designated waiting areas for VIPs, watchers, and alphas should be prepared and available for use, ensuring a comfortable and accommodating environment for those awaiting transportation. Additionally, a private driver from the family's company will be contacted to provide transportation. A branch of our institution is located in the city adjacent to the border of your pack. The expected arrival time for the aforementioned individual is approximately 30 minutes. Take care and contact me once you have met with the driver. Jackson promptly articulated his perspective. You have demonstrated a commendable level of efficiency in your beta testing. I would like to express my gratitude. I will do so. In response, she expressed her gratitude, indicating that his care had been a source of comfort and well-being. He had already taken all possible measures to ensure her well-being, yet he refrained from any further encroachment upon her privacy. Exhaling audibly, she acknowledged the artificial and rigid quality of her demeanor during the call. Thereafter, she terminated the call and proceeded toward the exit. It is imperative that she retrieve her bags and proceed to the border of the pack. Fortunately, she has not yet unpacked any items. It was observed that she retrieved an item from her luggage, which was determined to be a souvenir intended for her family members. However, these were sentiments that she was unwilling to retract, despite no longer desiring to bestow them upon her family. The objects, in her view, symbolized her affection for them. It is evident that the individual in question would perceive the act as a form of charity or a farewell gift. The remaining individuals present only then responded, observing her imminent departure. The subjects had been taken aback by the revelation that the individual in question was, in fact, a student of Moonlight, and more specifically, an alpha of a pack. This was an occurrence that would not be considered probable for a female subject, as it is generally understood that alpha status is typically held by males. Her brother experienced a sense of profound satisfaction, as he possessed an intrinsic understanding of her capabilities. It was unclear whether he possessed sufficient knowledge regarding her strength, as he had never directly observed her in her wolf form. However, he was confident in her intellectual aptitude and ethical standards. The father was at a loss to comprehend the situation. He had minimal communication with his daughter, and his knowledge of her was limited to her participation in domestic tasks. He was unaware of her interests, desires, and capabilities. A child who exhibits such qualities would undoubtedly be a source of pride for their parents. He regarded her as the least capable of his children, yet she proved to be the most adept of the trio. Her mother's eyes flashed. The esteem she would garner from all, including the pack's alpha, was a testament to her authority and respect. Provided that a Moonlight remained within the pack's boundaries, the alpha was obligated to comply with the requests of a Moonlight. Failure to do so could result in disciplinary action, including the possibility of exile, should a Moonlight exercise its authority by snapping its fingers. It had come to her attention that the Watchers were only below the Council, and the Council was only below the King. What measures could she implement to alter her daughter's perspective? Elara's departure, if it occurred without a prior establishment of peace with her, could potentially result in her permanent absence. The alpha couple exhibited similar levels of trepidation. The male offspring was on the verge of procreation with another female, thereby compromising the integrity of his rightful mate. It is conceivable that the true mate could exile or discipline them if she harbored resentment toward them upon her transformation into a full Moonlight 2 years later. It is possible that the aforementioned course of action could be pursued even earlier, should the individual in question elect to present her grievances before the Council. Given her position, it was quite easy for her to meet with them. As a lesser pack, they would certainly encounter difficulties in contacting the assistance of Council members. They would face even greater challenges in directly contacting their superiors. Elara's disclosures would be accepted as factual. Furthermore, she could even engage in the exaggeration of their acts, thereby leaving them unable to mount a defense. Elara, please pause for a moment. The subject's emotional state is characterized by a sense of profound disbelief and loss, as he expresses his astonishment at the notion of his companion's departure, and the profound sense of abandonment this action would entail. Karen inquired with a sense of urgency, his expression conveying a mixture of astonishment and concern. However, his primary concern at that moment was the profound connection he felt for her, a sentiment that transcended mere surprise. Alpha, I implore you to conduct yourself in a manner that respects the established norms of our society. You are on the verge of conducting your Luna ceremony with your chosen one. Her response was characterized by a lack of sarcasm and a tone devoid of emotional intensity. The subject was already exhibiting signs of relaxation. It was posited that the absence of interpersonal relationships could be detrimental to one's well-being once a connection was established. However, it appeared that the pain was gradually subsiding, a development that was met with gratitude. However, you are my companion. Rest assured that I will only conduct the ceremony for you. Upon hearing these words, her sister began to weep. She had been experiencing feelings of envy and anger upon learning that Elara had successfully completed the exams, and now she was also depriving her of Karen. Alpha, I am unable to accept a partner who has engaged in relations with numerous women since his arrival in our pact territory. Furthermore, I categorically reject the prospect of becoming the Luna of a man who has impregnated my sister. The subject's actions indicate a disregard for the sanctity of the mating bond, as evidenced by their previous actions. He was unaware of the methods by which she had become acquainted with his extramarital affairs, and even more so with her sister's affairs. However, the veracity of her statements left him unable to contradict them. Nevertheless, he was unwilling to relinquish his efforts. This was prior to my awareness of your existence, and with regard to Elara, I had presumed her to be my partner. It is imperative to acknowledge the validity of these claims and to refrain from denying or dismissing them. A werewolf is characterized by monogamy, with a singular mate for the duration of their life cycle. In the absence of my presence, the prospect of attaining a mate will be entirely foreclosed. Is it possible to refute the claim that the wolf is entitled to her appropriate partner? He reasoned with the only factor he believed would influence her. Indeed, the human side had the capacity to locate other werewolves or humans. These individuals could engage in reproductive activities with one another. However, the appropriate mate was defined as a single entity. Consequently, when the human side selected an alternative, the wolf within that individual could potentially experience distress. She exhibited signs of uncertainty, though not necessarily due to the consideration of seeking alternative partners. Rather, her concern lay in the well-being of her wolf. I do not desire your presence either. A lamentable companion, incapable of recognizing his own partner due to his incessant interactions with other women, and a wolf who lacked the strength to restrain him from his debauchery, who would desire both of you. On this occasion, Naira assumed command, expressing her sentiments with vehemence. The male's capacity to persuade was contingent upon eliciting feelings of guilt in Elara. He did not experience such sentiments himself. It is noteworthy that he did not express remorse for his actions. Karen recognized the speaker's identity, yet this revelation served only to exacerbate the already dire circumstances. He found himself unable to accept the notion that both individuals were collectively endeavoring to repudiate him. In a state of heightened emotional distress, the Lupin aspect of his personality asserted itself, enabling the human aspect to readily relinquish control over his body. The wolf's desire was congruent with his own. His eyes darkened as his canines and claws elongated, and he began to run towards Elara at his fastest possible speed. Karen's superior vision, honed through her advanced werewolf capabilities, enabled her to discern the movements of others with remarkable acuity. The swift motions of her adversary appeared to her to be nothing more than a juvenile endeavor to inflict harm. However, observing the intensity of his gaze as he tracked her movements, her countenance darkened, and her gaze became more frigid than when he had initially approached her. Her expression took on a more severe and unfriendly demeanor. In the event that his objective had been to initiate an offensive against her, her comprehension would have been unambiguous. He exhibited alpha behavior, and his sense of pride was wounded by the rejection. Nonetheless, the unrelenting gaze directed at her neck and the conspicuously open mouth were unequivocal manifestations of his intentions. It was evident that he harbored the desire to bite her. He endeavored to assert his dominion over her. It is evident that Karen's swift offensive maneuver should have culminated when his fangs were firmly embedded within her flesh. Consequently, she would have been compelled to accept him and remain by his side. These constituted the man's unfulfilled aspirations, as his head came to rest mere inches from her neck. He was perplexed and disoriented, grappling to comprehend the phenomenon in which his mark was ostensibly present yet seemingly inaccessible. Despite exerting his utmost efforts, he found himself unable to make any progress toward the anticipated outcome. The individual was immobilized completely by the female subject, who was seen to place one hand on the male subject's neck. This marked the inaugural instance in which she utilized her strength in human form at its maximum capacity, without the assistance of her two wolves. Nevertheless, it appeared that she had effortlessly overpowered him. Should she exert a slightly greater degree of force with her hand, it would result in a spinal fracture and subsequent death. However, it must be asked, what would be the result of such an action? In what ways would this action differentiate him from her? Despite employing minimal means to subdue her, she adhered to the established regulations and maintained her state of consciousness. According to Article 7.2b of the Moonlight Code, violence against watchers or Moonlight students is considered treason. Consequently, the Council has the authority to pass judgment as they deem appropriate, without prior notification. It is imperative to note that the following constitutes a mere cautionary statement: Alpha. In consideration of the pack that raised me, I will allow you to continue. If the subject were to attempt this task once more, they would forfeit the title they had just barely acquired. Upon completing her utterances, she propelled his neck, causing his body to collide with the wall. While she would not take his life, this did not necessarily render her a paragon of virtue. With a sudden motion, she retracted her left hand, which had been used to throw him. The tattoo on her left palm, which was only visible in the moonlight, made the realization of what had just happened all the more alarming. It is imperative to acknowledge that affronting a moonlight was not a matter to be taken lightly. It was subsequently evident that she was indeed a student of moonlight, given her ability to restrain an enraged alpha with a single hand. The question arises as to the number of individuals who would possess such a capability. This encounter marked a significant departure from their previous perception of her, unveiling an authentic and hitherto concealed aspect of her identity. Consequently, the sole rationale for the aforementioned treatment of the subject in the past was her acquiescence. Had she possessed such intentions, she would have had the capacity to challenge the previous alpha for his position in the pack. Karen's body exhibited signs of discomfort, prompting him to rise to a standing position. Despite his inclination to articulate a further statement, she did not grant him the opportunity to do so. "Alpha, it is futile to continue attempting to reason with me. The mate pull is a well-known phenomenon among werewolves. Subconsciously, you became aware that your sister was not a suitable partner for you. Even your wolf understood this, despite your own wishes that she be your partner. Her personality and physical attractiveness were held in high regard, meeting the standards many individuals seek in a romantic partner. It is imperative to acknowledge this fact. Consequently, it is imperative to complete the Luna ceremony, as the option of having me as your Luna is not a viable alternative, regardless of the duration of the wait." She then directed her gaze at the group and arrived at a conclusion. "It is imperative that each individual manages their respective issues independently. I regret to inform you that I am required to board a flight and must take my leave at this time." Subsequently, she made a swift decision to cease further dialogue. She had made several attempts to depart, but her efforts were consistently thwarted by the others. Upon regaining her composure and observing her daughter's departure, Myrna proceeded at a brisk pace in her wake, her destination being the exit. Elara's acute auditory perception enabled her to discern the sound of her own footsteps, yet she refrained from turning around to face her pursuer. Regardless of the circumstances, it was evident that on this occasion, her departure was indeed definitive. "Honey, pause. Elara, I would appreciate the opportunity to elaborate on this matter." The older woman spoke in a hurried manner, her expression conveying a sense of desperation. Myrna had even stumbled on her feet trying to catch up to her, but it was futile. She did not permit her mother to utter another word. The speed of the first-ranked werewolf increased, and the mother witnessed the wolf disappear. The only remnants of her presence were the slightly disturbed ground and the dusty atmosphere, both of which were the result of her hasty steps. The following is a list of key elements that must be included in any discussion of the subject. With Jackson's assistance, Elara was expeditiously transported to the airport, encountering no untoward circumstances in the process. The driver dispatched by the subject arrived at the border of the pack territory half an hour after the call was placed, and promptly transported the subject to the airport. Furthermore, he had ensured that she located the designated VIP area. Given that Jackson's father was the alpha of his pack and frequently utilized the designated waiting area reserved for the werewolf leaders of the various packs, the driver was able to direct her with ease. The subject had changed into her uniform and affixed the student ID brooch to her chest before departing from her residence. Consequently, no additional identification was requested for entry to the waiting room. Perched on the sofa with her head resting on one hand, she gazed out the window as the approaching aircraft appeared on the horizon. At this juncture, she had expended all her energy, leaving her with no remaining capacity to engage in any further activities. She briefly checked her phone to ascertain the time. She disregarded all the missed calls and unread messages that appeared on the screen, as her attention was focused exclusively on the ongoing conversation with Jackson. According to the details provided, Jackson had communicated via message with the woman regarding the flight, and it appeared that she would be required to wait approximately 1 hour more. However, she was fortunate. Requesting his assistance in reserving a flight proved to be a prudent decision, as it was the final one of the day. The flight in question was of a private nature, and consequently, it was not accessible to the general public or to low-ranking werewolves. Fortunately, her status as a Moonlight student had made all the difference. Consequently, she would have been required to wait until the following day for the first available commercial flight. Naira had also become tranquil. It was evident that Sable's prior association had a significant impact on the outcome. Sable has been demonstrated to have a calming effect on Elara and Naira as well. Her capacity for healing was unparalleled. For this reason, Naira had recommended that Sable take the phantom pains away a month ago, when Elara continued to experience discomfort. Concurrent with her musings about Naira, Elara's thoughts naturally extended to Sable. Following the act of providing solace to Naira in the hallway, the subject subsequently retreated to the forefront of her mind, and did not respond when Elara made an appeal. This prompted the subject to engage in introspection regarding the motivation behind the wolf's actions. Previously, upon Sable's retreat of her thoughts to the posterior aspect of her consciousness, the voice was perceived, and it would periodically emerge to engage in discourse. However, presently, it was as if she had undergone an isolation process, as if she had established a complete barrier between herself and the external environment. After giving the matter some consideration, she arrived at the realization that Karen's wolf was also intended to be Sable's mate. Consequently, it can be deduced that she must have endured a comparable level of suffering to that experienced by Naira. It was imprudent of them not to have also endeavored to ameliorate Sable's condition. Consequently, she refrained from making another attempt to contact Sable, granting her a period to reflect and regain her composure. Sable, the most reticent of the three, opted to internalize her challenges rather than disclose them. In the event that Elara or Naira endeavored to elicit information from the white wolf regarding the subjects in question, it is anticipated that the wolf would endure greater discomfort from the discourse than she would derive solace. This caused Elara to experience concern regarding her own situation, but the comfort Sable preferred was only the one she would ask herself. Exhaling audibly, as she had done on numerous occasions since becoming isolated, she engaged in intermittent dialogue with Naira. At the opposite end of the expansive VIP room, another individual was awaiting the aircraft's crew to conclude their preparations. The tall gentleman attired in a professional black suit, seated with legs crossed, was currently perusing a document. The subject was encircled by 6 security personnel, positioned in close proximity to his seat, thereby hindering the approach of other individuals. It should be noted that the somber disposition of the individual in question deterred any inclination on the part of others to approach him. The subject's coiffure, styled in the manner of a traditional African hairstyle, was meticulously arranged to align with the posterior aspect of the cranium. His countenance, characterized by a pallor reminiscent of alabaster, was accentuated by the presence of a prominent nose, a vivid blue iris, and a delicately formed mouth. These features collectively contributed to an aesthetic reminiscent of a beautifully crafted sculpture. However, the subject's elevated, contracted jaw and dense, upright brows formed a frown, creating an impression of unapproachability, even in the absence of the guards. As he perused the report, his countenance became increasingly somber, accompanied by frequent sighs and frowns. Intermittently, he would turn a page, before returning his left hand to the support of his head as he meticulously examined its contents. He attempted to focus on the text, while concurrently acknowledging the necessity of re-evaluating his subordinate. The report, unfortunately, was deficient in its structure, incorporating an excess of superfluous details rather than focusing on the key concepts. If he was obliged to verify every detail personally, then why would he require the assistance of others? He exhibited a further expression of displeasure, and then, having made a final attempt, he closed the document. It is imperative to examine the rationale behind the decision to grant a period of respite to Oren, the beta, in question. The individual in question demonstrated a notable absence of proper protocol in vacating his position. Consequently, he resolved that the unfortunate individual would not be granted another day of freedom for the subsequent 5 years. The employer had previously granted the employee a total of 10 days of paid leave over the course of 3 years, which should be sufficient. Raising his eyes to the immediate environment for the first time in 2 hours, he exhaled in a manner that indicated displeasure. His gaze fell upon the lovely image that had appeared at the opposite end of the room. Conversely, the most aesthetically pleasing woman he had ever encountered, and he had encountered many before, was seated silently on a couch. Her eyes, lacking in focus, gazed out the window. A cursory examination may not reveal any particularly noteworthy attributes. Her chocolate brown eyes were an ordinary, normal color. Most of the population on Earth had that color. However, they appeared moist and watery. The red rings that framed them, the clear evidence she had been weeping, served to accentuate their vividness, thereby enhancing their brilliant sparkle. Her dark hair was slightly tousled, fastened in a disheveled bun, which accentuated the diminutive proportions of her face, rendering her even more diminutive and endearing, notwithstanding the absence of cosmetics. In her totality, she appeared to be a woman of aesthetic appeal, though not to the extent that one would categorize her as the most beautiful individual. Nonetheless, her entire appearance was so perfectly synchronized that it resembled a masterpiece of visual art. He experienced an inability to disengage his gaze from her, a phenomenon he attributed to her captivating allure. It is conceivable that a partner with whom he shares a profound sense of compatibility and kinship would be desirable for him. However, he recognizes that such a person is unlikely to exist. Following an extended period of time, he had abandoned all hope of ever locating his companion. It is possible that he lacked even that fundamental understanding. Despite conducting an exhaustive global search, he had been unable to locate her. The young lady who preceded him was quite lovely, and it was conceivable that he might easily become enamored with her. Nonetheless, he did not experience the urge to approach her. However, his olfactory senses detected the pleasant aroma of strawberries emanating from the direction of the young lady, coincidentally the same scent he found particularly alluring. The establishment of a romantic connection between two werewolves is predicated on the existence of a specific allure or affinity between them. It is reasonable to assume that, under different circumstances, he would have recognized her at first glance if she truly were his mate. However, it is important to note that the wolf of the first subject did not seem to acknowledge the presence of the wolf of the second subject, and the wolf of the second subject did not recognize the wolf of the first subject. In order to be considered a mate, 3 conditions had to be met. The initial olfactory stimulus was of paramount importance, as the scent of a potential mate would prove enticing to a werewolf. The second stimulus was attraction, which would be discernible if the eyes of the mates were to lock. The third stimulus was the recognition of each other as wolves. The presence of her scent and the subsequent attraction were indisputable, however, the wolf's participation in this behavior was not. He sought a singular partner, one who was specifically designed for him. This phenomenon can be likened to the dynamic observed between his mother and his father. In contrast, werewolves of the traditional variety would typically cease to pursue their human partner once they have found their true mate. Additionally, he expressed a desire to be with his true mate. It is conceivable that she had been awaiting him, yet he had not anticipated her presence. This rejection caused him significant emotional distress. It appeared that, in spite of the circumstances, he had not relinquished his hope of locating his mate. He expressed derisive amusement internally, acknowledging that he had continued to await her despite the passage of time. After achieving a state of mental clarity, he observed the beautiful lady rising from the couch. It was at this moment that he took note of the Royal Academy uniform she was wearing. He directed his gaze toward the object under scrutiny, focusing intently on the metallic brooch adorning her chest. The objective was to ascertain the type of student the subject was, the year she was in, and her rank in her class. The silver-white moonlight brooch, which shone brightly, was a unique piece. It was exclusively possessed by a single student from the same academic year. Intrigued, he swiftly conducted a mental search, and in the subsequent instant, he experienced a profound realization regarding her identity. It had previously been communicated to him that, in the present year, a female had triumphed over numerous third-ranked werewolves in the Melee War, thereby becoming a moonlight and the alpha of the newly established class. This revelation had caught everyone, including the council members, off guard. Achieving victory against such a formidable array of alpha-ranked werewolves was no mean feat. Upon observing her from a distance, it became evident that she possessed a height that surpassed the typical norm for females. However, her physique appeared slender and somewhat delicate. He was unable to comprehend the manner in which she had vanquished her opponents. A multitude of individuals had strongly recommended that he observe the recording of the Melee War, emphasizing its spectacular nature. It was communicated to the subject that during the initial phase of the evaluation, the subject's behavior exhibited minimal aggression, with the subject primarily engaging in defensive maneuvers against the evaluators. However, during the course of the altercation, she transitioned from a defensive posture to an offensive one, which ultimately resulted in a resounding defeat. While he had initially been intrigued by the prospect of observing the contest, logistical constraints had precluded him from allocating the necessary time to do so. Upon observing her in person, his curiosity was further piqued, and he committed to observing the performance. He then followed her with his eyes until she exited the room, at which point he gestured to the assistant behind him to approach and issue an order. The latter approached with a sense of imminent success, his brow beaded with sweat, having just finished reading the report he had meticulously crafted. However, his anticipation was abruptly cut short. "Affirmative, Your Highness." The young man promptly acknowledged this gesture, accompanied by a slight inclination of the head. The objective is to locate pertinent information regarding the moonlight examination scheduled for this year. I would like to inquire about the particulars of the new alpha. He then issued a concise directive. I have already taken the necessary steps to ensure its availability, Your Highness. Would you like to proceed with the reading at this time? Additionally, I possess the audio recording of the Malay War. The assistant promptly proposed. Theron's countenance conveyed a sense of astonishment, suggesting that the assistant's initial impression of ineptitude might have been misguided. It is recommended that the individual in question be granted another opportunity, and that the individual in question be permitted to retain his 10-day vacation every 3 years. He was unaware that his assistant was actually an avid fan of the Watchers, especially of this year's Alpha, the first ever female moonlight. Therefore, he had merely maintained possession of the file to acquire further information regarding his idol. The following is a list of key elements that must be included in any discussion of this subject. The flight back to the Academy was marked by a heightened level of comfort in comparison to the previous occasion when she had flown. The private aircraft was configured with separate compartments for each group of passengers. Due to the fact that she was traveling alone, she was allotted a private cabin. She was even capable of taking a nap. While she did not exhibit signs of physical fatigue, she reported a considerable degree of mental exhaustion. The circumstances pertaining to her family had exerted a profoundly exhausting influence on her. Despite her best efforts to disregard their actions and to nurture the hope that her benevolence would effect positive change, the unfortunate reality was that it did not. In an attempt to alleviate her mental distress, she closed her eyes, allowing tears to trickle down her cheeks. As she drifted off to sleep, her thoughts continued to dwell on the memories of their faces and actions. Henceforth, she would prioritize self-sufficiency, and give greater consideration to her aspirations and ambitions. She made this pledge to herself. 2 months later she had just finished arranging her hair in a high ponytail, the final preparation she undertook before attending her classes, when she heard a knock at the door. "Alpha, are you prepared?" Jackson's voice, marked by its enthusiasm, could be heard emanating from behind the door. Having already completed the necessary preparations, she did not respond to his inquiry but hastily retrieved her mobile device, a small briefcase containing several notebooks and her laptop computer. She then proceeded directly to open the door. Upon seeing Elara standing in the doorway, just as he was about to knock again, Jackson smiled in a cheeky manner while they greeted each other. Subsequently, the subject awaited the Alpha to secure her room before they commenced their journey towards the cafeteria. Following the consumption of breakfast, the students proceeded to their initial classes of the Moonlight course. The first day of the semester was marked by a palpable sense of nervousness among the student body. They occupied the uppermost echelon in the werewolf hierarchy within their peer group. However, they were regarded with a certain degree of skepticism, particularly by the faculty with whom they had little interaction. These faculty members were only acquainted with werewolves through the accounts of their students. Despite the prevailing somber atmosphere, the group endeavored to maintain a sense of levity by engaging in humorous discourse during breakfast on occasion. Prior to their selection for the Moonlight courses, each group functioned as an independent entity. However, after a period of 10 years, they had formed their group. Elara also felt welcomed in their midst, as the fact that she was the only woman between them and their leader did not pose a problem. It was not evident to her that the other candidates had already become aware of her selection of them during the melee war, and they did not merely randomly expel people from the circle as she could during her attack. Following the altercation that left them perplexed, they repeatedly viewed the video to ascertain the method by which she vanquished them. It was only through a slow-motion perspective that observers were able to discern her agility, velocity, and power. Finally, it became evident that she had meticulously selected them from among the numerous werewolves numbering at least 30 that remained within the confines of the aforementioned circle during the period of conflict. Demonstrating adept maneuverability, she strategically displaced her opponents from the designated area, despite their varying degrees of disadvantage in terms of positioning relative to her own. It is conceivable that she could have experienced a more straightforward process in the elimination of the latter, as opposed to the former. In essence, she was the individual who selected them to form their group. Consequently, the subjects experienced a sense of camaraderie upon being acknowledged by her, and despite the passage of only 2 months, they had already formed a cohesive group. In the company of her male counterparts, she no longer experienced a sense of discomfort. She was not a loquacious individual, she did not attempt to engage in sustained discourse, and generally refrained from participating in their conversations. However, paradoxically, she did not experience a sense of exclusion. In addition, her status was consistently acknowledged and respected by the group. For the past 2 months, the subjects have maintained a consistent daily routine, spending the entirety of their time in each other's company. Their activities have included training, the assimilation of new rules, and leisurely strolls through the city. Consequently, a cohesive group began to coalesce. Good day, class. It is my pleasure to welcome you to your first course of the semester. My name is Elias Vainakes, and as you have all taken the SEER test, you will undoubtedly recall my name from your admission examination. As previously mentioned, I will be serving as your general knowledge instructor. The implications of this phenomenon are yet to be fully elucidated. The responsibility for imparting historical knowledge and expertise in the domain of supernatural entities, along with the methodology for addressing them, will fall upon my shoulders. This encompasses an analysis of vulnerabilities and strengths, an understanding of general knowledge regarding packs, the hierarchy within the packs, and the presence of rogues. It is also permissible to consider me as the primary instructor and to approach me with any additional issues that may arise. In the absence of inquiries, the following individuals are requested to provide a brief introductory presentation. The courses were scheduled to run throughout the day, with the understanding that, aside from the designated breaks for meals, no additional interruptions would be permitted. The subjects exhibited signs of fatigue during the late evening hours, specifically after 8 p.m., suggesting a potential strategy to facilitate sleep. Subsequently, when an attempt was made to extend their sojourn in the common room for the purpose of socializing, approximately half of the subjects succumbed to slumber on the sofa. From 8 a.m. to 8 p.m., the program consisted of the following courses: General Knowledge, Rules and Law, Combat Training, Strengthening Training, Combat Using Weapons Training, and liberal discussions of situations involving cases of misconduct with alphas. Additionally, there were more general knowledge courses, more training, and more law courses. The only aspect for which they expressed gratitude was the sequence of combat courses that followed each academic course. This sequence enabled them to engage in physical rest and mental training, and vice versa. Following a fortnight of adjustment to this arduous routine, the students of the general courses finally commenced their academic year. Given the teachers' anticipated participation in the ceremony, they deduced that the afternoon would provide an opportunity for rest following their morning engagement in combat training. Students, please proceed to the central amphitheater after you have completed your washing activities. Their combat instructor, Ben Brook, stated with a smile. The man in question was a slender, middle-aged individual with a physique indicative of a fitness enthusiast. Despite the fact that his facial expressions appeared to be indicative of a jovial disposition, his behavior during training sessions exhibited a stark contrast, as he demonstrated an alarming propensity for radical shifts in personality. This transformation, spanning a full 180 degrees, cast a notable shadow of doubt regarding the reliability and predictability of his conduct. Upon hearing these words, the students came to the realization that their arduous training had reached its conclusion. It should be noted that throughout the training, the instructor frequently referred to the students as maggots. The sole individual with whom he referred to her by her title was Elara, whom he designated as Alpha. However, this was not due to any respect he held for her position among them. The reason for his actions was that, in secret, he had also become her fan. He viewed the Melee War video on multiple occasions, experiencing a sense of astonishment. Notwithstanding the fact that he would not have viewed it, she had already garnered his recognition, insofar as she was the only one capable of maintaining pace with his training regimen without significant effort. The collective exhaled with a sense of relief as they proceeded towards the showers. The students expressed gratitude for the knowledge imparted to them by their teachers. In a span of merely 2 weeks, both the mental and physical prowess of the subjects underwent a substantial enhancement. Projections indicated that, within the span of 2 years, these subjects would evolve into individuals of notable distinction, emulating the exemplary qualities of their role models. However, the endeavor was accompanied by a significant degree of fatigue. Their attire was thoroughly saturated with perspiration as they proceeded towards the showers. To be forthright, what is the rationale behind our obligation to attend the opening ceremony? It should be noted that the academic term has already commenced 2 weeks prior. The question arises as to why a respite in the form of a visit to the city is not a viable option. It has been a considerable period of time since I encountered a particular group of young women. The necessity for the presence of women in my life is paramount. It is not my intention to offend the Alpha. Zane, the outlier within the group, expressed his exasperation by posing the following question. The tall, blond man with blue eyes exhibited a frown, indicating his displeasure at the alteration to the plan. Elara's smile indicated her lack of offense, and she continued to engage with the subject. At this point, she had ascertained the majority of their personality traits. It was evident that Zane, who exhibited characteristics of a playboy, was, in fact, awaiting the arrival of his significant other. Despite his frequent discussions regarding the pursuit of romantic encounters, he remained steadfast in his commitment to the group, accompanying them on their perambulations through the city as they sought out potential romantic prospects. While he expressed a desire to interact with them, he remained steadfast in his commitment to the group. Due to the presence of His Highness and half of the council at the opening, failure to attend would be considered discourteous. It should be noted that this event also serves as the opening ceremony. We did not have one 2 weeks ago. Ronan, the alpha of the pack, provided a response. The red-haired man, who possessed blue eyes and freckles on his nose, responded to him as he directed his gaze toward the uninformed Zane. Ronan exhibited the greatest resemblance to Elara, primarily due to his similar propensity for minimal speech. The subjects did not engage in further discourse, as they had already proceeded to the showers and divided into the women's and men's sections. Proceeding towards the amphitheater, the subjects maintained an orderly formation, as was customary in the area of the academy. Elara, the alpha, advanced in second place, accompanied by Jackson, the beta, who was half a step behind her on her right side. The remaining pack members were organized in 2x2 rows in front of them. The students' distinctive attire, which included black uniforms and brooches that symbolized their status as new attendants at the academy, attracted the attention of their peers and led to hushed conversations among the student body. The subjects were all of above-average height and physical attractiveness, with each individual possessing the capacity to attract attention independently. Collectively, they exhibited an amplified level of lethality. The female subjects were attracted to the strong alpha aura exhibited by the males, while the males felt respect toward them. Join our Facebook and WhatsApp group for more updates. Link is given in description. Rest audiobook will be continued in next episode.